Hello, everyone. I hope you've all been doing well. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Blackness, an audio series brought to you by the Zexel Initiative. I'm your host, Zion Kiana, and I'm just super excited to be here with you guys for episode 2. I know we're only on episode 2, but I'm just really excited to be taking another step on this journey with you all, and I appreciate you for tuning back in, so I appreciate it. Nevertheless, though, if this is your first time tuning in with us, or even if you're just a person that needs a quick crash course on what we're all about here, Blackness is really focused on redefining Black narratives and highlighting the diversity of the Black experience. It's really centered around the idea that the concept of Blackness is something that's multifaceted and can't really be boxed in or really defined to just one thing, which society very much tries to do so continually. Nevertheless, when I had first sat down to create this podcast, I really knew I wanted to create it as a way to challenge the harmful narratives that were being placed on Black individuals. And, I really just wanted to create a space where Black people could come on and, share their perspectives and reclaim their stories for themselves. In doing so, I wanted to showcase that we as people aren't defined by the stereotypes and label that society tries to put on us, but rather defined by, the work we do, the passions we have, our impact on the communities we serve in, and just so much more. And I think that's why, for me, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because it really harpers on a lot of those themes. This being said, I have the honor of welcoming a distinguished leader in both the journalism and media education world, Dr. Battinto Batts. So for those who are already familiar, or for those who attend Arizona State, or for those who are familiar with the journalism community in Arizona, you may already be familiar with Dr. Batts and his accolades, but for those who don't trip, I got you. So Dr. Battinto Batts is the current dean of the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at ASU. He's at the forefront of shaping the next generation of storytellers and media professionals. With a career spanning with a career spanning journalism, philanthropy, and academia, he's very much dedicated himself to fostering innovation, diversity, and integrity in his fields. So Dean Batts' accolades pretty much speak for themselves on why I would want to bring him on this show. But even despite those things, I feel like Dean Batts' perspective is a very unique and powerful one that would serve to the greater themes of what today's episode's about. Dr. Batts very much has the belief that your work should speak for who you are and not necessarily the assumptions others make about you based upon how you may look or where you may come from or how you may sound. So it's very much the belief that your work speaks for yourself and who you are. Now, in terms of how that belief feeds into the concept of Blackness, Dean Batts very much touches on this concept that for him, he didn't allow himself to be boxed in by what others thought of him. One thing that he very much was very conscious about was not being pigeonholed in as being the Black reporter. And, for him, it was very much about leading with his work ethic and demonstrating his capacity to what he could be and what he could do through his work, and I think that's very much a great testament. Like I said, Blackness isn't something that isn't defined by society and what it's labeled, it could really look like anything. Dean Batts credits Dr. King as being one of his greatest influences, specifically Dr. Martin Luther King, for those who don't know, being one of his biggest influences in terms of his mindset and how he looks at, racial dynamics. And I very much feel that you can see that influence in terms of how he carries himself and in terms of how he goes about things. And, I think that's a really admirable way to carry yourself. But with that being said, I'm really excited for you guys to hear this conversation that me and Dean Batts had. And, let's go ahead and get right into it. I hope you guys enjoy. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's next episode. Today, I have the pleasure of being in space with Dr. Battinto Batts, who happens to be the dean of the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. His resume and accolades speak for himself. I'm going to go ahead and give him the chance to introduce himself.
Hi. It's very nice to be able to be with you today, Zion, and just talking about what, issues that are really important to the viewers or listeners of your podcast, and just sort of sharing, my experiences. And my hope is that things that we discuss today will be, somehow inspiring or offer, guidance to people as they, go upon their journey and sort of seeking to figure things out in terms of their lives or their careers. And for me, if you would have asked me, 30 years ago or so, if I would find myself in the current role that I'm in, I probably would not have known this. I mean, so life is a journey, and don't always know where it's going to end up. And all we can do is just spend every day doing our best to try to move forward. The other thing that I would say is that, for me, it's all about, you know, again, the journey and the journey of serving and serving others and uplifting people and helping them to achieve their goals in life. And, that's the role of any educator. And that's what I am. The dean of the Cronkite School, but fundamentally, I'm an educator and someone who just seeks to serve the needs of others and try to uplift them and to get them where they're trying to go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those words, Dr. Batts. So just starting off the bat, let's go ahead and talk about your early life. Why don't you tell us kind of, how you grew up, some, the culture that you're around. Let's start there.
Sure. So I grew up in Central Virginia in a community that is south of Richmond, Virginia, about 25 miles south of Richmond, in between Petersburg and Richmond, an area called Chesterfield County. I grew up by Virginia State University, which is a historically Black university. And so our community in southern Chesterfield and over into Petersburg, it was a very diverse community, community that was represented from lots of different cultures. It was a highly educated community because of the university, which also had people who worked in factories. You had people who worked in farming, and so you had lots of different people from different backgrounds that come together to make what I think is one of the strongest communities that I've ever had the fortune to be a part of. And so there were a lot of people who were role models all across, the spectrum, Black, white, it really didn't matter. It was really about trying to pour into young people who were growing up in our community and people who were committed to mentoring and providing guidance and support, helping to keep you on a straight path. So all of the teachers, from elementary school all the way through high school, again, cuts across all of the ethnic spectrums and backgrounds. Were really, I cannot say that I came across anybody who was, older than me or was in a position to be a teacher or a mentor who didn't want to invest the time into helping me develop. And if you had a desire to learn something, if you had a desire to reach a goal, to gain knowledge, to gain experiences, there were plenty of people there. And, a lot of them happened to be people who were professors at Virginia State. My father was an administrator at Virginia State. He was in the career planning and placement office at Virginia State. So he was the director of cooperative education. He did that for a number of years, helped a lot of students get, internships and jobs with, major Fortune 500 companies. And so just watching my dad take a lot of pride in seeing students go on to opportunities, that really stuck with me. And it's something that I, again, take a lot of pride in as well. My mother was also an educator. She taught K through 12 and really focused mostly on students who were in elementary school and some middle school, but she was also a math tutor. So there was a lot of, students in the community who came to our home to get tutoring in math. And those people, became friends and all of that. So really what I'm trying to lay out for you is a really complex structure of support. And the whole thing we've heard about, it takes a village to raise a child, is true. And I'm a product of that type of village.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you're surrounded by educators as well, with both your parents being educators.
Yeah.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, the school that your dad taught at, that was a historically Black college?
Yeah, that was Virginia State.
Okay, for sure. Now, being around, an educator from Virginia State and also your mom being an educator, how do you feel like that kind of influenced, your understanding of Black identity? I know you talked about Virginia being a pretty diverse space in itself. So how would you say some of those influences influence what you thought Black identity to be?
Sure. So, I mean, everybody's experience is different, and I can only speak to mine. In our household, you know, it really wasn't like stressed. Like, okay, your identity as a Black man or a young man growing up as African American is clear. Okay, I'm African American. It was really more about what does your pathway to success look like? Okay. And what will it take for you to get to where you're trying to go? What are your goals? And I just remember that so much. My dad and my mom just stressing the importance of having goals and having your eye on where you're trying to go in life and being committed to the work and the process that was going to take you there. So I was never confined with, okay, well, you're not going to be able to achieve this or be able to achieve that because of what your skin color is or anything like that. I was never given any sort of mindset that there was anything that was not possible because of, my ethnicity. It was always about you're gonna achieve excellence. You're gonna work hard. You're gonna do what it takes. You're gonna be committed to it, and you know, no, nothing should stand in your way, and not to embrace any sorts of barriers or what have you. And so the thing about it is that not only from the aspect of the influence of my parents as educators, but also the educators who were at Virginia State, people who were in our community who's, oftentimes, I started my own lawn care business when I was 11. So yeah, so I got to cut the grass for several people who were teachers at the university. And so these were people who set the example, and they may have come up maybe during a different time during I'm sort of a post civil rights child. I was born in 68. So civil rights was still going on, but really the bulk of that work was done prior to me being born. So the people who were my mentors were people who came through segregation, who came through, some, some of those periods of transition. So they had high levels of expectation for me and my peers. Okay. So it was like everything is possible if you put in the hard work. But the other thing is that my community, and the mindset was very much, you know, shaped by Dr. King. And Dr. King visited Petersburg about a half dozen times, and a lot of his organizational structure was in Petersburg. And he visited a number of the churches. And my uncle, who was on city council, actually introduced the idea or the concept of there being a Dr. King Day in Petersburg. And so that was actually introduced by my uncle, who was on Petersburg City Council. And so the whole thing was about, again, for us, really going by Dr. King's mantra, that not being measured by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. So that goes all the way back to what I was saying, is that my parents were never in my ear about, okay, well, you're not going to be able to achieve this because of the color of your skin. It was like everything was possible. And I never, viewed as anything not being, attainable if I didn't if I put in the hard work. And so that's what I still believe.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a beautiful testament. That's very much something I grew up, or my parents raised me on too, was that regardless of the color of your skin, anything's possible. I don't think that element of color really came in for me until I started, actually going to school and like actually traveling outside of where I was raised. So I'm curious, would you say that's a similar experience you had in terms of like kind of seeing like, oh, okay, there might be, some static here?
Yeah, I mean, I was a journalist for a long time, for about 2 decades, and covered a lot of stories, in that time, stories about what's happening with the education system, stories about what's maybe happening with the criminal justice system, and uh, I got to meet and interact with lots of different people from lots of different perspectives that were different than mine. And that was really a cool thing about being a journalist, is that you just get to learn so much, and to you get exposure to, again, perspectives that that may be different. And so it was eye opening for me, because the world that I grew up in, was, I wouldn't say it was sheltered, but I would say it was the world that I grew up in, and it was the world that I knew. And so as a journalist, and hearing people talk about their own experiences and their own, maybe, struggles or things that they may have encountered, was certainly eye opening. And then having to report on that, and learn about that, and to really look at that from a maybe, an objective, point of view, and the things that they were saying about maybe that they were facing, perceived, discrimination, or feeling like they may have been targeted for whatever reason. Again, for me, it was eye opening. I can't say that in my life that I've had anything that I've experienced where I would say this is like a blatant, thing that occurred to me strictly because of my skin color. Okay. And maybe that's being naive or what have you, but I can't say that I've ever could say that something happened or either didn't happen strictly because of my skin color. Do I think that people, is it possible that people could look at me and maybe make their own determinations about me without getting to know me? Sure. But that's on them, and that's a judgment that they decide to make. My job is to be the very best version of myself that I can be. And if that changes their perceptions that they might have had about me, then great. But again, my job and what I'm supposed to do is be the best version of me that I can be, pursue my goals, try to help to bring other people along, be a good person, be kind, be helpful to everyone, and to be a role model. And then, what you have to understand in life is that some people are going to like you no matter what, whether you're black, white, green, blue, whatever, they're going to like you because they like you as a person. Okay. There's going to be some people who, no matter what, they're going to hold something against you for whatever reason, whatever misconceptions, things that they may bring to the table based off of their, lack of understanding or what have you. And your hope is that they will become somehow enlightened or get past whatever misconceptions that they may have, and that they will, want to, support you or be friendly with you or what have you. And then you're going to have people in the middle who may have skepticisms. I mean, we all come into this in our experiences, with skepticisms and, like I said, misconceptions. But my hope is, and our hope is that people will be open-minded and want to, again, seek to get along and to work together. And so that's really where I think our opportunities are. I mean, for me, I'm not, again, like I said, based off of my experience, and I can't speak to someone else's. I have two younger brothers, and they might tell you something completely different if you ask them. They came up in the same household, raised by the same parents, and had the same influences. Their perspectives may be slightly different than mine. I can only speak for myself, okay? And where I've chosen to be in this is that I believe that all things are possible. I believe that, that you're going to encounter, you know, tough times, or you're going to encounter challenges, but it all depends on how you choose to process it and how you look inside yourself and say, how can I be better? Okay. And if I didn't achieve this, how much of it is because of me? Because it's real easy to blame something else. It's real easy to say, okay, I didn't achieve this because of this. Okay. But at the end of the day, we only get better if we hold ourselves accountable. If we look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, I failed here. I didn't achieve what it was that I was after. I didn't perform to my best. Why is that? Okay. And holding yourself accountable for your own performance. So that's a long answer, but that really is, again, how I have navigated the world.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a pretty resolute belief and kind of mindset to have. I think it's something that a lot of us have kind of, come to over time. But I gotta ask, I know you were raised to kind of have those values instilled in you already, but at any point did you kind of feel yourself wavering or kind of struggling with that? I know coming up with your peers, did at any moment you kind of were second guessing that mentality?
Sure. I mean, I think that, again, everybody's household is different
Mhm.
and everybody may grow up with different values or perspectives. And, sometimes maybe in school, in hearing maybe some struggles that other people were having and however they were choosing to explain it to themselves, sure, you sort of ask yourself, okay, well, am I missing something? Have I just been lucky, or have I like not experienced the same thing, or if I just am I being naive here? And then also, um, there's no one way to be, you know, African American. Okay. There's no like mold that we all follow because we're all, again, defined by our, our, our histories, our family histories, our culture, our experiences, you know, things that we read, that we're exposed to, who our friends are, who our family's friends are. My family experience, if you were to spend time in our household when I was growing up, it'd be people from all parts of the community were coming in to our household. My father, because before he worked at the university, he worked in retail. And so a lot of his, people he worked with were from all sorts of different cultures. So they were friends. Okay. My father was a salesman. And so he was part of sales groups with people from all sorts of cultures and perspectives and backgrounds. So, again, my experience was a little bit different. And so sometimes I kind of felt like, okay, well, because I felt different and because I, was maybe, exposed to things that maybe other different than other people, that, am I somehow different? And what I've come to believe is that everything in terms of my upbringing, the people, that my parents and my family brought into our lives, our friends, because they had, such a diverse friend group, that prepared me for really my life, and that as a journalist, if you're doing journalism the right way, your mind is open to all perspectives. You want to see things from all sides. You want to be objective. And so the only way that can happen is that you have to have you have to be wired that way. And so, you know, like I said earlier, there were times in my life that I felt like, okay, I don't fit in one particular place.
Mm.
Okay. And there was a while there where I felt uncomfortable with that. I felt like, okay, I'm not like everybody else. But of course, anybody can say that because we're one of one. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, I became more comfortable being who I am and more comfortable in my skin because the things that made me unique are the things that enabled me to go on the journey that I've been on.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful testament. I feel like, the whole point of this podcast is to demonstrate that blackness doesn't just look like one thing. I feel like that experience you just shared is perfectly in line. There's no one way to be black. There's no one way how black people could show up. And, I think that's important. And speaking of important, I think when it comes to like trying to demonstrate that to other people, one way we do that is through representation. From your experience, it sounds like you had strong representation from your mom, your father, and kind of some of your other mentors. Is there any other representation that served as, I guess, a goalpost for you? Like, was there any African Americans or people you came across that was like, if they can do this, this is a strong figure, I can do it too.
Sure. And so so this is not going to be like someone who everybody knows, but some people who listen to this may know this person. One of the people who I admire so much and I draw on in my role as an administrator is Dr. William R. Harvey, and Dr. Harvey was the president of Hampton University for 44 years. And he changed my life, gave me an opportunity to get into academic administration. And he tapped me for an opportunity when I was at Hampton University to be an administrator. And I didn't see it for myself. But he appointed me the director of the Leadership Institute at Hampton. And because of that opportunity, I got to interface with him quite a bit and to learn a lot from him and observe him as, as a leader and as a president and what it meant to be in academic administration and what the expectations were. And so a lot of the things that, I say or do, for example, when we have faculty and staff meetings, I say something that he used to always say at faculty and staff meetings after I give my report. And I'll say, does anybody have any questions about anything I said or that I didn't say? And then the importance of, no margin, no mission. If you're not bringing in funds to support what we're doing, we won't be able to continue this. And being, fiscally conservative as an administrator, but then also making sure that you put your best foot forward in terms of, the appearance of your program, your building, your physical plant, all those things. Those are things that I learned from him. But more important than any of that is to be a servant leader. And what it means to be a servant leader is really doing everything that you can to help to uplift people to where they're seeking to go, being able to see the best in people. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to make mistakes or that they're perfect, but seeing the best in people and being loyal to them through good and bad, up and down, and helping to move them forward. And so I just am very, very grateful for the example that he provided as a leader. And it just, like I said, it meant a lot to me because if a lot of us can talk about people who we know of, who are historical leaders. I mentioned Dr. King earlier, of course, but maybe few of us can have people who we can say, this person really, really changed my life and also gave me a blueprint for what leadership would look like in this role or this capacity. And so I'm very, very fortunate to be able to have that and to draw on the example that Dr. Harvey provided.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect testament. Now, the next question you've kind of already touched on in some of your other responses, but feel free to elaborate here. But my next question is, how has your identity, played a role in terms of your journalism career? I know you've kind of talked about, having to work with diverse communities, having to deal with certain people, but, how would you say just broadly it's played into your career somewhat?
Sure. I mean, so I graduated from college on a Saturday, and I got a full-time job at the newspaper I started on that Monday. Yeah. I finished, I did undergraduate at Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU, and had been working at the Richmond Times-Dispatch while I was in college. And they were really responsible for me finishing college on time within 4 years because they offered me a job. And so I started a full-time job, and I remember the systems engineer at the paper, and he pulled me aside, and he was a white gentleman, and we had spent some time together, and I liked to learn a lot from him. And he said, okay, congratulations on getting your job, but don't let them make you the black reporter. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, don't let them just confine you to covering one set of issues or one set of the community. Try to get as broad a swath of experiences and a broader swath of stories that you can get, because that's going to really help to take you far in your career. And so for me, I really sort of sought to kind of, break any sort of mold in terms of what it was that I could cover, or what it was that I was interested in covering. I didn't look to be a black reporter. I looked to be a very good reporter and very good journalists who just happened to be Black. And I felt like that was the best way that I could serve as an example to people, is that I could go anywhere, because the way I see journalism and where I see media, because it is a part of our Constitution. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press are written into our Constitution. It's part of that's what makes our Constitution strong. It's a part of the system of checks and balances. It's a part of what helps to build our democracy. And so for me to do it the right way meant that I need to be able to relate to everybody. And that's the example that I really have tried to set in my work with in my work with journalism, but also in my work as an educator. I'm everybody's dean, and I'm seeking to be the best dean that I could be, and to serve as many people as I could possibly serve, regardless. And whether it's a Black student, Latino student, white student, it doesn't matter. If I can help you, I'm going to be here for you. The same thing with all of the professors and people who work for us here. That's my approach to this.
Continuing on that topic, just in general, how important do you feel it is to have those role models for Black individuals in media? I feel like a lot of times when it comes to trying to get people to understand the significance of why representation like that matters, what's your personal take on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, just basing off of my experience, and I spoke about where I grew up, and people who were pivotal in my life and played a role in just guiding me, and I spoke about the person who had really guided me into journalism when I was really in my senior year in high school, and we are still friends today. Her name is Bonnie Winston. And so she's an example of someone who was someone I looked up to, but also could play a real hands-on role in helping to give me guidance, mentoring, and advice, and was just someone who was available to me whenever I needed it, not only when I was, in high school or going into college, but really after college, early parts of my career. We even worked together for a while. And then even now, if I needed her, I could text her. So I've known her for like 40 years now. And so I think that from a mentorship perspective, it's great to have people who we look up to, and maybe someone who we know or see or read about or maybe see on television or what have you. But it's also good to have people who we can, touch, so to speak, and who have the opportunity to have a direct impact on us. And so that speaks to the importance of, you talk about representation, and, you know, representation can come in a lot of different forms. And it's not only about, um, from a racial or ethnic standpoint, it's really about people who've had shared experiences. And, because as your podcast sort of focuses on, there's more than one way to have a Black experience or whatever. I mean, everybody is not just defined by the color of their skin. It's really about, what their experiences are, how they were raised, who they were raised around, who poured into them, who saw the potential that they have and really tried to foster that potential and can identify with you. And so for me, it was, I really had a range of people who, when you think about representation, and like I said, my life is, I think of myself as so much, I don't see myself as Battinto, the Black man. Of course I'm Black. I mean, I've been Black for 56 years. I'm going to die Black, but we know that. But, so there's no denying that. But I lead with what I'm about and what's important to me and the impact that I'm trying to make in this life while I'm here, because I'm not here forever, and so What is it that I want to be known for? And what legacy do I want to lead? And so, and then who do I identify with? And so the thing that I've really always been about is bringing people together. And, I personally, anybody who knows me pretty well will tell you I'm adverse to seeing people in conflict with each other. And so how can we find common ground despite whatever society might say that our differences should be looking at us on the outside? That's just our shell. Okay. So my skin color is my shell. What really who I am is my values and what I am on the inside and what's in my heart and what's in my mind and what drives me and what's important to me. So when you talk about thinking about representation, I've gravitated to people who have wanted to use whatever skills and whatever opportunities in their job or whatever to bring people together. And how do we make society better and use them as role models of recognizing that you're a link in a chain, okay? And that you wouldn't be where you are if someone didn't somehow link to you and try to bring you along. And your responsibility is to bring somebody else along, okay? Regardless of, you know, skin color or ethnicity or what have you, I hope this concept of a colorblind society, of course, we may never get there. Okay. And, um, but, from an idealistic point of view, I just think it's so simplistic to just, again, to look at people and say, okay, because of what their outside appearances are, that you understand them and know them right off of the bat, just off of face value and just on a visceral reaction. We got to spend time getting to know people. We got to spend time getting to know what drives them. And I think that we'll find that we have more alike than we realize. And I think that that's my hope is that that's the future. And if that sounds, again, idealistic, if that sounds a lot like Dr. King, it probably does. I mean, because, that's really where I mostly align myself, and where I really try to do is utilize my platform and whatever influence that I have to try to break down barriers and bring people together. And yeah, we can talk later on about how we're different, but while we're together, let's talk about what we have in common and how we can solve things, because we're on this world, we breathe the same air, we confront the same problems. And, let's not put circles around ourselves and say that this is only, a black problem or a Latino problem or a white problem. It's everybody's problem. And I think that when we can do that, my hope is that that'll help us to be able to move forward, together. So that's a long answer, but I felt like I had to kind of explain that to you.
I understand that, yeah. And I think your answer kind of is supported by the idea of representation in the sense that in terms of getting to a society where, people aren't constrained by, whether that be external beliefs based upon how somebody may look.
Yep.
Or, where they may come from, I feel like representation is the key to getting there. You being the dean, the first Black dean of the journalism school, for a lot of students who may not be aware of certain like racial issues or stigmas, it's like, okay, cool, he's the first Black dean. What does that mean? But, on the back end of that, you have the students who really see the significance in that. For me, I'll say when I found out you were the first Black dean and that the dean of the journalism school was Black, that was like, okay, that's awesome. This is definitely an industry where I can exist in and still be my authentic self.
Yep.
And it's definitely, kind of, I feel like it just demonstrates the importance of why it's important to have these people represented in these different spaces.
Yeah.
And with that, with that in mind, I guess the other question I have for you is, why, in your opinion, I know everyone kind of has their own personal take on it. I know I do. But in your view, why do you feel like society has kind of created this kind of, I'm not sure if box is the right word, but kind of, I guess, yeah, let's go with box. Why do you feel like society has kind of set box around people in regards to, their ethnicity or where they may come from? On this podcast, we're specifically looking at, the the box that society often places Black people in. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, because it takes work to sit down and really try to understand somebody and understand what makes them who they are, and to really get beyond, again, just taking things that are from a visceral standpoint or from an outside standpoint, or just, just looking at someone's skin color and then, thinking that you understand or you know everything about them. That's easy. It's easy to do that. It takes work to sit down with somebody and again and engage in a conversation, because what that also requires of you is being vulnerable, someone on your behalf, and admitting that, number one, there's a lot that I don't understand. I don't know you, but I want to know you. And getting to know you also means telling you something about me. Okay. And so I think that it's because we as a society, when I speak we, I'm talking broadly, we don't spend a lot of time in conversations with people anymore. Our lives are really constricted to, a lot by social media, our phones. We spend a lot of time on our phones, and we look at life through the prism of, you know, mostly media platforms. And then we don't engage in long form conversations. Everything is sort of short, quick hit. Our attention spans are all over the place. And I love social media as much as anybody else does, but there's always a downside to that. And I think we have lost, I don't want to say lost, but we don't exercise the muscle of getting in conversation with people as much as we used to, because life is just going along at such a fast clip that we just, don't spend that time that we used to spend. And so I would say, if we can work to do that and spend more time in conversation with people and wanting people, it's not your job, it's not my job to make somebody like me. Okay. Mm-hmm. I've got to be my authentic self. I've got to be who I am, understand what my purpose is, and carry that out to the very best of my ability. Some people are going to like me a whole lot. Some people are going to be like, Some people may not ever like me. Okay. And that's okay. We have to be comfortable with that. But I think that, again, it, if more people can just commit to, I'm going to get to know somebody who is outside of my normal network. I'm going to engage with somebody who I believe probably disagrees with me on some things. I want to understand their perspective and why we might disagree, and make that a purposeful thing. And you may not come to an agreement. You don't enter into conversation with them to come to an agreement. You enter into the conversation to learn, okay, and to expand your perspective. And again, you may come away from that saying, "Nah, I don't agree with much of anything that they're saying," but okay, but you can still be cordial, and you can still be friendly to people. You don't have to agree with everything to be friendly. And so that's how I would say. I just think that we've gotten like that because it's just the other part takes more work to make happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think just conversating with people is definitely a way to, break out of that mindset. And I feel like you said, it's very much easy to be like, okay, if this person looks like this and they come from here, okay, I'm just going to assume this about them with it. Yeah. So I think that's very much true. Now, I also heard you touch on the piece of media, obviously. A lot of times the perception that we have about certain things is, it's through the media we consume. Yeah. And I guess my question to you is, for the people, specifically journalists, and for the people who are going to be in the media industry coming into the future, what ways would you recommend trying to navigate, breaking down some of those narratives?
You got to get out of the echo chamber, and you got to get out of just reading or listening to or viewing things that's easy for you and that tells you things that you already know. Yeah, there's some comfort level. You got to have what I call comfort food to go to that just, that makes you feel good because you just, it's saying what you want to hear. it sounds familiar to you, it it aligns with what your beliefs are. So we have to have comfort food, but then we also got to have food that's different. You know, you got to try, you know, a lot of people love to travel because they love to try new foods. Okay. They're open to it. And so you got to be open to trying new perspectives and consuming media that expands your palate. Okay. So to speak. And, you know, I grew up in the South. So I'm a son of the South and all the foods that come from the South. But I've had the fortune of living in a few different places and my palate has grown. I've had the fortune of being able to travel abroad and my palate has grown. And so you've got to grow your palate in terms of your consumption. Okay. Because if not, you're not going to be able to speak with clarity, you know, from a broad perspective. And so if you're going to be in media, you got to be able to have some awareness of a lot of different things. So it's very, you know, most people who are in media have what I would call a narrow but broad knowledge, you know, a little bit about a lot of things. So you can at least engage in a conversation with people about a lot of topics, at least have some relevance there. Okay. And then there's certain things you're going to know a lot about, but you need to know a little bit about a lot. Okay. And that's what I would say. And so, if you can break out of what your media habits are and try to read other publications or read new authors, listen to different podcasts, look at different, you know, TV shows, look at different TV news, you should do that. And you should do it again because you want to be educated, you want to be informed, you want to at least reach a point of understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a great testament. That's something I've found myself doing too, that I've actually been working through is, you know, kind of just sticking with what's comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, obviously as a journalist, we're trained to like consume from multiple places,
Yeah.
but I found myself recently getting too comfortable with just going to the same three news sources. So I definitely think that's something that, you know, a lot of people could be more aware of in terms of, you know, trying to get out of those echo chambers. So,
And the other thing that I will say, I just can't emphasize this enough. Everybody's not going to agree with the way that I have come at this or what I'm positing here. But this is the way that, number one, I was raised to be. But I have two younger brothers, and they may give you a different perspective. So we grew up in the same household. I mean, I'm the oldest, but even their perspectives might be different than mine. And I've had to navigate my world the way that I've had to navigate it. And it's unique to me. You know, the way we choose to navigate the world is based on who we are as unique people and what's important to us, what drives us, our personalities, all of those things. And so again, you could talk to two other men who I know very, very well, my brothers, you know, who are both my youngest brother is getting ready to turn 50 and my middle brother is he'll be 52 this year. And so I'm you know, I'm the oldest, I'm 56. And so they will have, yeah.
I didn't know that. I
Yeah.
was thinking like 40s, but okay.
No. And so what I'm saying is that everybody doesn't think alike. Okay. And so you just got to know that. And like I said, we had the same parents, grew up in the same house, but they might give you a different perspective on things. And so, you know, I'm just telling you, this is the way that I have oriented myself to the world around me. And this is what has worked for me. Someone else might take a different perspective and that's fine. I respect that, you know, but, for me, you know, I don't deny my identity. Like I said, of course, I've been black for 56 years. I'm going to die black. Of course, I'm a black man, but I am defined not by my ethnicity or my skin color as much as about who I am and what I'm about. And that's how I looked at it. And that's part of it is probably because of being a journalist. And my approach to being a journalist was to be able to report on anything. And that was advice that I received from someone who was who had been a black journalist. was like, okay, make sure that yes, you could go cover quote unquote Black issues, but you really need to be able to do all sorts of things so that you're not pigeonholed into one thing. And so that's the approach that I took to that. And that's the approach that I take to pretty much everything. So there you go.
No, I hear you. I think that's definitely a valid perspective. I think it's important that Black issues get covered, but I think it is also important to be able to cover a broad range of things. So I think that's very much valid. There's two more questions for you, Dr. Batts. So the first question being, is there any encouragement or advice you can offer for young Black people out there? I'm saying this podcast is intended for a wide range audience, but specifically with it addressing the concept of Blackness and the broad spectrum of it. What's some advice or words of encouragement you could offer to those who kind of feel maybe similar to yourself at one point, where it was like hey, I don't fit into what's considered to be traditionally Black, or hey, I'm not this way. So what's some words you could offer to them?
Sure. I mean, I would say first and foremost, you have to know that you are special and that you're valuable. And you have to be able to tell yourself that your value is determined by you, and that you are unique and you have a unique journey that you're on, and that yes, there are some things that you're going to share with your peers, but there's some things that are just going to be unique to you and to what you do. And so what I would say is the best thing that you can do is continuously and relentlessly pursue self-awareness of about, who you are, why am I here? What are my gifts? What are my strengths? What do I value? And how can I help other people? And if whatever that is, you may decide, okay, well, my role is that I want to uplift, Black people. Okay, great, good. Okay, if that's what you value and that's what's important to you, then go for it. But do it in the means that you're going to be the very best at it that you can be. And you can use maybe role models of people who have come before you, but still you got to do it unique to you. And figuring out, okay, but so what does that mean for me? I mean, you may have your own role models and people whose work that you value, but that's how they did it. Okay, what can you learn from that? But then how is that uniquely applied by you? Okay, and so you just have to know that. But I would say definitely self-awareness, having role models, and again, I would say role models who you can really be in touch with and get to know. People who will be honest with you about their mistakes and what they've learned, and will be invested in you in some regard and helping you to get better and to move along. And so that would be sort of my two key pieces of advice: self-awareness, strong role models, and then the last thing I would say is being able to not just talk about what you've done, what's important to you, but to show. Okay. Because that's how you gain respect, is like, don't just talk about change, show how you're actually making change happen. Show how you're taking that self-awareness and you're actually putting it into practice. So,
Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah. I think that is also very much in line with the concept of being yourself as well.
Yeah.
Like you said, being self-aware of, who you are, you're your own unique individual. So I think that's very much a powerful testament.
Yep.
And then the last question, it's kind of, you could take your time to think about it. It's just a little wild card we have on the show. So what does Blackness mean to you? So I asked this to all my guests, everyone's answer has been different because, like I said, the whole theme is there's no one way to define what Blackness is. So what is Blackness to you? If you don't mind me asking. You could take your time to think about it, but it's a little bit of a wild card.
To me, it means excellence. It means perseverance. It means change. It means responsibility. It means helping and guiding, and recognizing that people look up to you or are looking at you to understand. And so there are people who are looking at you because they want to understand what it means to be Black. So you have to always be cognizant of that. And there's also people who, are looking up to you to try to figure out, okay, what does being Black mean and how do I do this in this world? And so that means that there's a lot of, responsibility that goes along with that. And, none of us speak for an entire group of people, okay? Because just like when we say that when somebody messes something up, it's like, well, they don't speak for all of us. That's not how all of us are. And when they're really good, that that's not how, it doesn't speak for all of us. Nobody, there's no one way to do this. There's no one perspective. It's very complex. And, that's what I would say is it's, if I would say one word to my answer, it would be, it's complex.
Absolutely. I love that. Perfect. Thank you so much, Dean Batts, for coming on today. And that will be conclusion. So.